Some arrogant people spend their entire lives bragging about hollow achievements, while I spent 4 years hiding my true identity behind a fabricated desk job. I did not keep my military career secret out of shame or fear of danger, but because the highest levels of national security demanded absolute silence. At home, my family treated me like an unremarkable failure who lacked ambition, while my younger sister was celebrated as the golden child of the entire household. But on the evening of her lavish engagement gala, when she pulled me into a dark corner and sneered that my low-class existence was an embarrassment to her decorated Special Forces fiancé, the truth did not remain buried. 10 minutes later, when her war hero fiancé looked into my eyes, his smile vanished, his champagne glass shattered across the marble terrace, and 60 elite guests watched in stunned silence as he snapped to attention and saluted the quiet sister everyone had spent years mocking. My name is Samantha Vance. For the past 4 years, whenever relatives, neighbors, or family friends asked what I did for a living, I gave them the same practiced, mundane answer. I worked in regional maritime cargo coordination for government supply depots. It was a boring, forgettable cover story that drew zero follow-up questions, and that was exactly how I needed it to be. The reality of my service was locked behind top-secret clearance protocols that I could never discuss with my parents, my closest friends, or my younger sister Whitney. I was the operational commander of Task Force Ghostfall, a specialized joint tactical search and combat extraction unit deployed exclusively when deep reconnaissance teams were trapped behind hostile lines in impossible conditions. We did not wear identifying name patches, our names never appeared in official press releases, and our operations were completely wiped from public records the moment our helicopters touched down at base. Growing up, I was always the overlooked older daughter who lived in the shadow of Whitney's glamorous social climb. Whitney was charming, obsessed with wealth and status, and constantly praised by my parents for her networking prowess in elite social circles. I, on the other hand, was the daughter who vanished for 3 months at a time on sudden work assignments and returned home with bruised ribs, calloused hands, and no exciting corporate stories to share. My parents openly lamented that I had wasted my youth on dead-end administrative work, while Whitney made sure to remind me at every holiday dinner how far ahead she was in life. That toxic dynamic reached its absolute peak when Whitney announced her engagement to Major Colton Brooks, a legendary Navy SEAL commander whose combat decorations and heroic reputation made him the crown jewel of our entire social circle. Whitney was completely intoxicated by Colton's prestige and military pedigree. For weeks leading up to the engagement celebration, our family group chat was flooded with endless updates about Colton's battlefield awards, his elite squadron, and the high-ranking defense officials who would be attending the celebration at our parents' country estate. The night of the event, the backyard was transformed into an opulent ballroom with crystal chandeliers hanging from garden trees, fairy lights illuminating the manicured lawn, and 60 high society guests dressed in tailored tuxedos and expensive designer evening gowns. I arrived quietly after completing an intense 48-hour debriefing cycle, wearing a simple dark navy dress, hoping to stay in the background, drink a glass of sparkling water, and observe the evening without drawing any unwanted attention to myself. The contrast between our two lives could not have been more striking, yet I had long made peace with walking my own solitary path. I had only been standing by the stone terrace for 5 minutes when Whitney marched over in her imported designer lace gown, her expression sharp with irritation. She grabbed my forearm with tight fingers, leaned close so nearby guests could hear, and hissed that tonight was the most important night of her life. She told me that Colton's commanding officers and tactical team were present, demanding that I keep my mouth shut about my boring cargo logistics job, because Colton only respected high-achieving elites and had zero tolerance for unimpressive, low-class people. Several socialite guests standing nearby chuckled openly at her cruelty, while my parents stood 20 feet away, smiling proudly at Whitney, without uttering a single word in my defense. I felt the sharp sting of their disrespect, but I simply nodded, stepped back into the shadows of the stone pillar, and maintained my calm. What Whitney and my family failed to understand was that real sacrifice does not announce itself with boastful fanfare. While my sister spent her 20s attending charity balls, shopping at luxury boutiques, and cultivating superficial status on social media, I was enduring the most grueling combat training known to the armed forces. I had led high-altitude halo jumps into hostile territory, navigated Arctic blizzards during search missions, and pulled wounded comrades out of burning wreckage under heavy fire. The scars I carried beneath my dress were not fashion statements. They were badges of honor forged through blood, sweat, and an unshakable commitment to protecting human life. I never needed applause or social validation, but watching my own sister weaponize her fiancé's military service to humiliate me revealed the hollow shallowness of her character. True bravery is not measured by the admiration of a crowd or the status of a fiancé, but by what you are willing to endure when no one is watching. At 8:30, the heavy wooden garden gates swung open, and Major Colton Brooks entered alongside 3 of his senior tactical operators, all dressed in immaculate formal dress blue uniforms, adorned with gold medals and combat warfare insignia. The energy in the garden shifted instantly. Guests straightened their postures, conversations ceased, and Whitney rushed across the lawn to wrap her arm around Colton's, beaming like she had conquered the world. Colton greeted my parents with polite warmth, shook hands with influential businessmen, and carried himself with the quiet, commanding presence of a seasoned combat veteran. But as Whitney guided him through the crowd toward the terrace, she brought him directly to where I stood holding my drink, clearly intending to use me as a contrast to elevate her own importance. With a mocking smirk, Whitney made the introduction, announcing with feigned pity that this was her quiet older sister Samantha, who worked a low-key cargo supply desk job. Colton smiled politely and extended his hand, saying it was a pleasure to meet me. I took his hand and replied with a calm, respectful greeting. But the moment our palms touched, Colton's grip tightened, his smile vanished, and his eyes locked onto my face with a look of disbelief that quickly bordered on sheer shock. His gaze flicked across my eyes, my jawline, and the faint shrapnel scar near my hairline, his breathing turning shallow and rapid. Whitney laughed nervously, asking if everything was all right, but Colton was completely deaf to her voice. His fingers went numb, and the crystal glass of vintage champagne in his other hand slipped from his grip, shattering violently across the flagstones. The lively garden jazz quartet instantly stopped playing as the sound of shattering crystal echoed through the estate. The entire courtyard went dead silent as 60 guests turned to stare in shock. Colton's 3 SEAL teammates immediately pushed their way through the crowd, their expressions turning from casual smiles to utter bewilderment. Colton stood frozen, staring at me as if looking at a fallen warrior who had returned from the dead. His voice came out as a trembling whisper that carried across the silent terrace. "Commander Vance, Ghostfall 1. Whitney blinked in utter confusion, grabbing his arm and laughing nervously that he was mistaken, insisting I was just a boring supply clerk who had never left an office desk. But Colton ignored her completely, stepping forward with tears glistening in his eyes. Colton turned to his 3 teammates and addressed the stunned room, his voice shaking with raw emotion and reverence. He recounted that 2 years earlier, his reconnaissance unit was ambushed in an isolated mountain gorge during a catastrophic zero-visibility blizzard. With communications severed, heavy insurgent fire pinning them down, and 2 teammates critically wounded, they had accepted that they were going to die on that freezing ridge. But when all conventional rescue assets deemed the weather conditions unsurvivable, an unmarked stealth extraction unit codenamed Ghostfall breached the storm on foot. The lead operator had carried their wounded radio operator 2 miles through freezing sub-zero winds, neutralized the hostile perimeter, and brought all 6 men home alive. Colton explained that command had kept the unit's identity strictly classified, but 2 years later, a single declassified combat photo was given to him as a permanent commendation. He spoke with an intensity that commanded absolute stillness, painting a vivid picture of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the miraculous intervention that saved them all. With trembling hands, Colton reached into the inside pocket of his formal dress uniform and pulled out his leather service wallet. He withdrew a worn, laminated photograph and held it out for the entire crowd to see. It showed me in full combat extraction gear, covered in snow and soot, carrying an injured operator across my shoulders against the burning horizon of that hostile mountain ridge. Colton looked up at me with profound reverence, stating that he had carried that picture every single day of his life, praying for the opportunity to thank the warrior who saved his team. Whitney's face went completely white, her hand falling limp from Colton's arm as the reality shattered her shallow worldview. My parents stood paralyzed near the champagne fountain, their glasses trembling as 4 years of unearned condescension dissolved into overwhelming shame. Colton snapped to attention, brought his right hand to his brow in a crisp, formal military salute, and his 3 operators immediately followed suit, saluting me in front of the entire assembly of high society elites. The terrace erupted into stunned whispers and awe, as the guests who had laughed at Whitney's insults now looked at me with unyielding respect. I returned Colton's salute with a calm, steady hand, telling him softly that bringing his team home was the greatest honor of my service. Whitney tried to stammer an apology, but I simply looked at her with gentle pity, reminding her that true strength is never found in designer dresses or boastful words, but in quiet courage, unyielding loyalty, and the willingness to stand in the storm for others when everything is on the line. As I walked out into the cool evening air, I felt at peace, knowing that truth never needs permission to shine. Never mistake quiet humility for weakness. Not ever.